First, I would like to thank and recognize our partners and sponsors for their generous support. Our presenting sponsor at the platinum level, the University Health System. Thank you all. Our gold sponsor, Hope Hits Harder Foundation. Thank you, Tibon. Our silver sponsor, the Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas. Okay. And Team Cancer America. Yes. Also, I would like to thank our table sponsors, in particular, Mr. Charles Ledy, who couldn't be here today, for his sponsorship and for accommodating us in this excellent venue. Yeah. Now, please join me in recognizing our young adult cancer survivors in attendance. Please stand up and be recognized. Any cancer survivors, young adult cancer patients? Yeah. Thank you so much. How about the healthcare professionals who care for them? We have nurses here, we have doctors who take care of our AYAs. Please stand up. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I would also like to thank and recognize our board members in attendance, the members of our planning committee, and our volunteers for their hard work and commitment to our mission. Please stand up and be recognized. Where are our board members? I think they are out there registering people. Yeah. Volunteers? Okay. Last but not least, I would like to thank our friend and partner, Dr. Archie Blair, worldwide recognized as the father of young adult cancer movement, for sharing his invaluable time and wisdom with us. We're extremely honored and excited to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Blair. Thank you, Archie. Since its foundation in 2019, our nonprofit's main purpose was to raise, or has been to raise, philanthropic dollars to address two of the most challenging issues older adolescents and young adults with cancer face. And these are: one, financial help to afford basic living expenses, and two, support to cover the cost of fertility preservation procedures. As you know, cancer or its treatment can put at risk the fertility of these young adults with cancer. As many of you know, also, financial hardship in young adults with cancer is common and has been named financial toxicity. The following two stories will help illustrate the difference our nonprofit is making in the lives of young people with cancer. Anthony was a young man in his 20s diagnosed with testicular cancer. During his first visit to the oncology clinic, the social worker discovered that Anthony and two other family members had been living in their car for the last month. The social worker reached out to us. Our patient assistance committee immediately granted Anthony and his family a $5,000 grant, allowing them to find a safe, clean place to live, and money for other necessities such as groceries, gas, and utilities. Sarah was an adolescent diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Prior to starting chemotherapy, her physician suggested that she undergo collection of her eggs, freezing, and storage for the hope of children in the future. However, her family was unable to afford the cost of the procedures, which, as you all know, in young women, they can be fairly expensive. Her physician reached out to us. We were happy to award her the full cost of the procedures at the time, which was $8,075. Ladies and gentlemen, your support empowers us to continue this life-saving and life-giving work. Thank you all for being here. Now, I would like to introduce Ms. Constanza Roeder, who she is our MC and the chair of our planning committee. Constanza is the CEO of Constanza Roeder Consulting LLC. I keep having trouble saying your last name for some reason. She's a highly sought-after speaker, consultant, and arts in health professional, committed to fostering health and well-being through creative expression. Drawing from her personal journey as an adolescent leukemia survivor and founder of the nonprofit Hearts Need Art, which you all know, she has been recognized for her impactful contributions and received the prestigious Gracian der Humanitarian Award. She has also been honored as one of the top 100 healthcare visionaries for her trailblazing work. Without further ado, Constanza.
Good morning, and thank you, Dr. Estrada, for having me here today. Yeah, it was the spring before my freshman year of high school, and I started to get sick a lot. And lots of tests and doctor's visits later, I was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital near where I lived in California. And there I underwent 130 weeks of chemotherapy. And life has never been the same. Having cancer at a young age hits a little bit different. Karen Fasciano is a psychologist that studies the psychosocial issues for AYAs, and she visualizes it this way: all the different life disruptions that happen for teens and young adults with cancer. It is complicated. This is a complicated time of life. And it adds to the already heavy burden of just having cancer. Thankfully, I did complete all my treatment, and I have been cancer-free for 22 years. So, and after college, I spent many years working with AYAs in hospitals as a peer and also as an arts and health professional. And I'm passionate about supporting AYAs and improving the systems that treat them. And today is an important step forward in advancing that cause. I have the distinct pleasure today of moderating a panel discussion between the founder of the AYA movement and AYAs themselves. Who are AYAs? What are their big needs? And what responsibility do we all have in the quest to save our AYAs? These are some of the questions we're going to try to answer over the next hour together. And as you can see, we are recording this conversation. You will receive an email after this event once that video is available. And we would ask that you share this discussion with colleagues, families, friends to spread awareness about issues that AYAs face, so that we can all help save our AYAs. We do have a virtual program that has more detailed information and bios about our speakers. So I'm going to leave this up here for a second if you want to pull it up on your phone to reference later. It's also on some of our other slides here as well in the bottom corner. But now I'd like to introduce you to our panel. The first person I'd like to introduce is Stephanie Hartman. Stephanie is a 28-year-old hospice nurse and 3-year breast cancer survivor. An interesting fact about Stephanie is that she has been on the AYA oncology unit at University Hospital, both as a nurse and as a patient. Let's welcome Stephanie. Next, I'd like to welcome Ryan Clay. Ryan is a 35-year-old PhD student in molecular and cellular biology studying lung cancer metabolism at UT. He is also a 2-year survivor of leukemia and celebrating 1 year cancer-free. Yes, Ryan? Fun fact about Ryan is he was an accomplished saxophonist during undergrad, and I asked him if he was going to grace us with some musical performance today, and he said his saxophone is safely in Florida. So, sorry for the disappointment. We did have one AYA scheduled to join us today, but he is unexpectedly unable to return or be here with us in person. So I'll be sharing short pieces of his story at different parts of the panel discussion, but I did want to recognize Eddie Manrique. He's a 28-year-old marketing specialist for the hospice provider Vitas, and he's also a 5-year survivor of testicular cancer. So I'd like to give him an applause as well for letting us share his story. And finally, the man of the hour, Dr. Archie Blyer, has devoted more than half a century to clinical research. He's scooting down in his chair right now. Currently, he is a clinical research professor at the Knight Cancer Institute of Oregon Health and Science University and collaborator of the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington. He served as chair of the Children's Cancer Group, the world's largest pediatric cancer research organization, the American Cancer Society professor at University of Washington, and head of pediatrics at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Since 1995, he has focused on adolescent and young adult oncology, and more recently, AYA sociology, public health, and the impact on U.S. life expectancy. Let's welcome Dr. Blyer. Dr. Blyer, you're widely considered the founder of the AYA movement. Could you tell us a little bit about what are AYAs and how did you discover that teens and young adults needed their own category in cancer world? I'll let you.
Notice. Oh, I'm honored to be here, and I want to appreciate the location, the venue, and all of you. I do want to, and I'm going to be very careful about this in some way, come back to Eddie, who was unable to make it. So we'll point that out when it's appropriate, as possible and feasible. All right, I'm Archie Blyer. I do have some slides to show to explain why I think AYA is important. And so we're going to go back to its birth of AYA oncology, and then I'll talk how it grew up and matured to the point where you're here with us to proceed to continue to make it mature. Here is the incidence of cancer across the age span, from birth on the left to 70 or so. I'm not even on this scale. That's interesting. All right. And what you notice is that when you're older, the likelihood of having cancer goes up almost exponentially. I mean, it goes up so dramatically that 90% of people with cancer in the United States are older adults or really old adults. But the point is that because cancer is so common in older people, we've been studying for a half a century or more how to treat them because we had to. They're the ones who had cancer. But back in the 1940s, there was discoveries in children with cancer that set the stage for treating adults with cancer, older adults with cancer. In fact, the first discoveries that cancer can actually be cured came in children less than 8, 7, 6 years of age. And most of everything we learned back then in the 1950s and 60s came from what we learned in children. So we jumped from children to older adults to apply what we learned, and somebody got left out in between. Let's look at the incidence of children up to the age of 15 in this lower inset. There is a nadir, a low point, where the least likelihood of having cancer is about the age of 10 or 12, but then it starts going up again. And then you see what happens in the bigger framework behind it in terms of the rapid escalation. But what's in between are AYAs, and there's a little O in there too, I think you see, and that means older adolescents, 15 and up. And we didn't include back then the 13 and 12-year-olds, or 10 and 11-year-olds for that matter. So AYA may be young adolescents. So if you say YA, instead of AYA, you can include them too. Okay. But notice that they were ignored before 2005. What I noticed in 1995, 30 years ago, next year, 30 years ago, that we were not treating adolescents with cancer, because I was chair of the Children's Cancer Group, national group, also with members in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, Uruguay. But I noticed that the progress we were making in young children wasn't happening to adolescents. And then the next thing I had to look at is young adults, and it was even less obvious in those adults. So after looking at, and now it's a little hard to understand this, the increasing annual percentage in the improvement of survival. So what's on the scale is the average annual improvement in their survival rate. And what you see on the bottom scale is the age, with the AYAs having hardly any, in fact, a negative increase. In other words, a decrease in survival, whereas children less than 15 on the far left bar, actually I don't have a pointer, okay, had an increase of 1.1% over the previous 20 years. That's 20% increase in survival. And of course, the oldest adults on the right side, including Medicare persons, had 0.5 or 0.6 to 1.0 every year increase in their survival rate. But in between were AYAs. Those of you out there and on the stage, yeah, everybody here, including Eddie, would not have had an improvement in their survival. If anything, maybe they would have been worse off in 1995 compared to 1975. So I brought this to the attention of the United States. During the next 10 years, it took that long before the National Cancer Institute held a review of the problem, so-called Progress Review Group. And they presented, thank you, this strategy plan in 2004-05, which ultimately became a definitive plan, which is why we're here today, because the National Cancer Institute, the federal government, was able to, through its state and local vendors, improve the problem. How much did it improve? Well, the gray bars show what happened between 1975 and 1995 when I was hit by this problem. And the green bars in front are what happened from 2010 to 2015 in the improvement of survival. So now you see, as of the last 10 years or so, that we've done more for AYAs in some ways, a little bit more than in young. Yes, I'll yeah, thank you. And for that matter, if you look at the number of persons with cancer by age, on the left you see children, of which during that period of time there were 27,400 some, as opposed to the AYAs who were newly diagnosed in the same period of time to have cancer, there were 214,000. So there were 8 times more AYAs having cancer than children. So not only weren't we helping them, there were far more of them than children. So the problem became more obvious. So again, why you're here. And if you look at the annual current rate, as best we can estimate, there are over 90,000 newly diagnosed AYAs with cancer in the United States every year. And I don't have time to get into this, but it's increasing. It's getting more per year. The incidence of cancer in young people, AYAs, is going up. We can talk about that if you want to. And then finally, in terms of why we're here, with the effort over the last 20, 25 years of trying to do something about this, the survival rate, and this is the 5-year relative survival, relative to the general population, is actually a little better in AYAs than it is in children or adults. I'm over there in the final bar on the right, and I've had one form of cancer. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, who out there wants to tell me at my age what kind of cancer I had? Say it loud. Prostate. Yeah, prostate. Okay. And I'm 5 years out, so I know a little bit about that too. Okay. Okay, that's right. All right, so here's the last slide in terms of why we're here. On the left, you see the kinds of cancers in that pie diagram in children. On the right, you see the pie diagram for old folks. They're very different colors. They're very different in terms of percentages. Turns out that in between, AYAs have a completely different group of cancers. Those pie diagrams don't look anywhere similar for the AYAs at the top of the slide there. And it turns out that doctors, healthcare professionals, nurses, social workers, psychologists, etc., were used to either treating children with cancer in the kinds they had, or older adults in the kinds they had, and treating those in between was not recognized, comfortable, apparent, because they didn't have that experience. So we've had to reinvent AYA oncology and actually now create, and I forgot to discuss this yesterday, new AYA training programs for medical students, interns, residents, and fellows in AYA oncology. And there are places in the United States, between 20, 25 of them, that are doing just AYA oncology to teach caregivers, professionals, healthcare professionals, to deal with the problem, because it's so different than the younger and older. Okay, that sums up what I think is the reason that we've made some progress. And you'll hear from here on out throughout the main serving of dinner and maybe dessert why we got a long way still to go.
Thank you for that introduction, Dr. Blair. I saw an article actually recently in the New York Times talking about the increase in incident of colon cancer, specifically in young adults. And one of the issues the article brought up was the misdiagnosis and delay in diagnosis of AYAs with cancer, and leading to them being diagnosed at later stages and worsening prognoses. Can you speak to this issue and share why primary care and urgent care doctors need to know to catch, what do they need to know in order to catch cancer in AYAs sooner?
First off, physicians and providers, healthcare providers, nurses, psychologists, social workers, etc., are used to what they used to do. So the older adult was something they understood, and the older adults like me get prostate cancer or colorectal cancer, so that's what we would expect to do in terms of diagnosing somebody who's got symptoms of those. If a young adult walks in, or a 14-year-old sitting next to me at the time, we're not going to think of colorectal cancer because that doesn't fit with what we know. That's why there are special training programs now to change that. Yes, colorectal cancer is increasing, although we're now understanding there's somewhat of a misunderstanding about that, but nonetheless, it's increasing in young people, especially 40 to 50-year-olds, who are out there somewhere and should worry about it some. So if you know to worry about something because it may personally affect you, then you will think about it and bring it to the attention of caregivers when you show up at, as one of us will tell you, the emergency room, or your primary care provider, internist, gynecologist, pediatrician, family practitioner. So the same thing with AYAs. All of us here who were AYAs or are AYAs, I don't think anybody's going to be an AYA right now, but okay, need to know that cancer could happen. And that understanding, that awareness is what we need to get out to everybody in the United States. Other countries do a better job of that than us. So just knowing that cancer can happen, and that when you show up, as you will hear, at a place where they wouldn't have thought about it because they're not trained to think that way or they haven't had that experience, and they misdiagnose not colorectal as much as many other cancers like lymphoma and leukemia and sarcomas and ovarian cancer and testicular cancer, brain tumors, because they're not thinking of it. So I think that's a partial answer, but I think our patients up here could answer it even better.
That's a really good point. When I worked with AYAs in hospital, I would say a majority of them were diagnosed in an emergency room after pursuing treatment and getting misdiagnosed, and then finally ending up being an emergency situation. And Ryan, that's kind of been your story. You were one of those AYAs diagnosed in an emergency room. Can you share a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So can you hear me? Mm-hmm. So I was feeling. I just moved here from Florida back in the beginning in January 22, and then in March I went to the doctor, had blood work and everything. Everything was completely normal, and then by September, just 6 months later, I went from going to the gym every day, working out, being in decent shape, to just not being able to walk across a parking lot, not being able to climb a flight of stairs. So I went to my primary care doctor, and I told him about my symptoms. I told him I had this rash on my legs. It turned out to be petechiae, which is where your blood vessels break because you don't have any platelets left. And I told him about this rash on my leg, and she's like, all right, we're going to order you like $2,000 in STD testing. This has to be an STD. And I was like, I don't think it's an STD because it's not in their groin. It's just on my legs. And she's like, yeah, I think it's an STD. So, so I went home that night and I got a call from the doctor at 7 a.m. on a Saturday telling me to go straight to the emergency room because the blood, one of the blood panels came back and I had no blood, just out of blood. And so I went to the emergency room. I got there at like 8 in the morning, and then I didn't get a room until like 2:30 the day after. But I was there. I got to the emergency room on a Saturday, and I didn't leave the hospital for 35 days. And I remember it was kind of a surreal experience because the doctor found out that I was in science, and she kind of, oh, she's not here right now. She kind of dropped her, dropped the facade a little bit, and she would come back with negative test results like, this isn't good, right? And I'm like, I'm perfectly aware it's not good to not have any blood. Thank you.
Did somebody bring you your saxophone while you were in for 35
No, the
days?
saxophone's back in Florida.
Still
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yeah, but it was kind of a surreal experience because I was getting the negative STD results coming out on my phone throughout the day, and the doctor's coming in and like, it's not this rare disease, and it's not that. And, this isn't good, right?
Wow, that's crazy. I think one of the big issues in AYA is psychosocial needs are different. There's human development is different, like where we are in development as adolescent and young adults is different. Our needs are different. And when those psychosocial issues aren't addressed, it affects prognosis and really the course of treatment. Eddie, one of our AYA who wasn't able to be here, when he was diagnosed, they told him he had a tumor in one of his testes and they needed to biopsy. And that, of course, freaked him out as a young 20-something man. And so he asked if there were any other options. And so they were like, well, we can just kind of wait and see and monitor. Well, they wait and saw and monitored until it became metastatic cancer. And no one came alongside him to hold his hand, tell him, this is serious, we need to take care of this, but we're going to get through it together. And AYAs need that additional human love and attention. I would say all humans need that. I'll just put that out there. But AYAs in particular, they don't always have the resources that older adults have or the parental support that young children have to help them work through that initial shock of receiving a diagnosis. And we see this pretty commonly in young men where they will sometimes avoid treatment or avoid follow-ups because they're not getting that additional support and follow-up that they themselves need so that they can get to the treatment that they need in order to survive to prevent metastatic cancer. So I did just want to share that little bit about Eddie's story. And Stephanie, you kind of almost had the opposite problem of, Eddie had never encountered mortality before when he was diagnosed. That wasn't really a topic on his radar. But you were a hospice nurse when you were diagnosed, and your husband had had cancer previously as well. So what was it like going from a caregiver to a patient?
So being that I've been in and around the healthcare field most of my life, I was a CNA for many years before I was a nurse. I knew to do breast self-exams. Well, I was doing a routine self-exam. I noticed, okay, there's a lump. Probably need to get this checked out. Went to my PCP. She was amazing. She said, I don't think it's cancer, but just to be safe, we're going to send you for testing anyways. So I went to the Mace Cancer Center, went and got examined, and they said, well, we found this lump, but it could be nothing, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to go ahead and do a biopsy. Probably nothing, don't worry about it. Well, about less than a week later, I get a ping on my phone while I'm at work. Test results come in on my little MyChart app. I'm about to walk into a patient's home, and I pull up the test result. Invasive ductal carcinoma. I recognize that cancer diagnosis because one of my other patients had previously passed away from that. A young female, mid-30s, with 4 children in the home. I've seen this cancer diagnosis before, and now I have it. All bets were off at that point. I was a mess. My first phone call was my then boyfriend at the time, now husband, and my mother, because I didn't know what to do going forward. I've never dealt with this. I've never had to deal with this. I knew my grandmother had breast cancer, but it was completely different. She was older when she had it. So it was completely different for me.
Thank you for sharing that. I did really quick want to say before we go forward, could someone bring our panelists some water? We've been to have them placed on the stage, but if one of the servers could bring water to the stage, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Invasive scans and procedures are another pretty standard part of the cancer experience. And Ryan, you believe that it's important for providers to build trust with patients. And one of the ways they can do that is to tell us what is actually going to happen when we go into a procedure or a scan. Because I think sometimes they'll withhold information, one, maybe because they don't know, and maybe we need more peer support of like, hey, this is what this process is actually like. And 2, maybe they don't want to overwhelm us. They don't want to deal with the emotions of trying to tell someone all the steps of this invasive procedure that's going to happen. But then that breaks trust with us when we're put in situations that we're not adequately prepared for. And Ryan, you have a rather uncomfortable and surprising experience involving tape. Can you share that?
Yeah, so this is my tape story. So so going on about, like, we have to do a lot of invasive procedures. Like, I couldn't tell you how many bone marrow biopsies I've had, and they all suck. And so some of the stuff that we have to do, like, that isn't even as invasive as a bone marrow biopsy is, like, I had to do testicular radiation for my stem cell transplant. And in my experience, the doctor, he was very gracious with his time, except for when it came to describing the procedure that I had to go through to do the testicular radiation. And he basically described it as you go to a CT scanner, we take an image, we draw the radiation field, and then you do 3 treatments, and that's it. So I'm like, cool, I can do that. Like, doesn't sound that hard. And then the actual procedure is you show up, you take your pants off, so you're like Winnie the Pooh on a CT scanner. They immobilize your legs, and then they have to tape your penis back so that they can draw the radiation field around your testicles. And it's very uncomfortable because, like, it'd be one thing if they went at it, like, just, do your job, just grab it, pull it back, and tape it. But the nurse that I had was very timid about it. Instead of just grabbing it and going for it, she tried to take the tape and, like, stick it to it and pull it up. And it just kept, like, flopping back over, and it was very uncomfortable. Yeah. And then the doctor, I finally just, did it for her. And then the doctor comes in, and I'm imagining there's some high-tech, like, CT technique where they draw the radiation field, and the doctor just pulls out a Sharpie and draws a circle around my testicles. Like, there they are. And that was the radiation field. So.
I love that. Can we give him an applause for sharing that story? And, speaking of penises, fertility is a really big issue for this age group. We're disproportionately affected by it. We're of childbearing age. It affects our fertility more than even young children. And like many AYAs still are not informed even about the risk to their fertility. And I was one of those. I found out about the risk to my fertility after I was done with treatment. I found like this pile of little pamphlets that they give you with your medication that has the list of all the side effects and long-term issues and all of that. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I should read about this. And I was reading, and on almost all of them, it said infertility. And I was devastated. I was dating a boy at the time, and we were getting pretty serious, and I knew how passionate he was about kids and that he wanted children. And I had to go to him and say, you can't be with me because I might not be able to have kids. And thankfully, he thought I was cool enough to stick around. And we've been married for 16 years now, my husband, Jeff. Thank you. Yes, 16 years next month. But we weren't able to have biological children. And I was not given the option to preserve my fertility before I started treatment. But even if you are offered that opportunity, you can't always afford it. And Stephanie, you had the ability or the option to preserve your fertility. Would you have been able to pay for it and do that if not for the AYA Cancer Foundation?
Absolutely not. Going into all of this, it was very overwhelming, and luckily my mother-in-law had a whole bunch of connections, or my now mother-in-law had a whole bunch of connections. She actually was able to get me in touch with Dr. Estrada, and going through the different processes of, okay, I need to get a port, there's all these checklists, and one of them that got brought up was, okay, fertility. Cool. Don't really know what that's about, but cool. Well, long story short, my mother-in-law, my now mother-in-law, was very forward in that, okay, you need to go get your eggs preserved because the chemo can affect it. Well, long story short, because of her, I was able to get in touch with Dr. Estrada, and because of a grant from the AYA Foundation, I was able to go get my eggs preserved with UT Health. And without that grant, there's absolutely no way I would have afforded over $8,000 just to preserve my eggs, just to have them frozen. And
insurance did not cover it.
Absolutely not. No.
Very important point. Finances are around, all around are a big challenge for AYAs. A lot of AYAs are the primary breadwinner. They maybe are they're single people and they're the only ones in their household. And it disproportionately affects this age group. And Ryan, well, I'll back up a little bit. Eddie shares that he owes his life to the AYA Foundation because when he needed a scan, he wasn't able to afford it, and the AYA Foundation was able to provide him a grant, for the scan, which discovered his metastatic cancer and saved his life. So these are life and death issues when we're talking about financial challenges for AYAs, and sometimes it's the difference. Financial support is the difference between buying groceries and not. Ryan, could you share a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, well, I have to say I benefited from the AYA grants. Number one, when I was given the opportunity to preserve a sperm sample before I started treatment. But again, it wasn't covered under insurance, and even though it's for sperm storage, it's much less expensive than what women have to go through, but it was still $600, and they want payment up front. They don't even bill you; they want like upfront payment. Some like they're in the hospital room having to produce a sperm sample. I have an IV in my arm, and not a romantic environment, and they're like, I get the bill like right away, and I have to pay it, and I didn't have $600, so I had my mom helped me out there, but the AYA grant has enabled me to continue paying the storage fee this whole time, and I've been lucky that I have my mom and my sister that live in Florida, and my girlfriend lives up in Austin, and I've had a lot of support from them financially over the past 2 years. But after 2 years of paying for all this, everybody's just broke. And the AYA grant was literally what fed me for a few months.
Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. Dr. Meyer, what do we do about this? Have programs like the Affordable Care Act made a difference for AYAs? He has slides. Hold on.
All right, so several years ago, a number of us published that the Affordable Care Act, which was enacted in the United States in September of 2010, so it's 15 years ago now, 14 years ago, okay, had a dependent coverage expansion so that those who were turning 19 or 18 even could stay on their parents' insurance. That's why it's called dependent coverage expansion. And they then allowed that to occur up until the age of 25. And we'll come back why that needs to be increased too. Okay, so we published some temporary preliminary evidence that there was benefit of those who were 18, 19, 20 back then in terms of being able to survive longer or die less or die less. I don't think that you can read it, so let me emphasize that above the age of 18, the United States has the world's worst health insurance rate. Yeah, and everybody's nodding. You all know that, right? There isn't another country in the world who stops insuring their persons or citizens, residents, at the age of 18. We do that. Until the dependent covered expansion in 2011 when it happened. So if you go back to 2010 and you see here the curve for the uninsured percentage by age. So way on the left, you see less than 10%, 5-6% of the United States children were uninsured in 2010 when the Affordable Care Act was passed. If you look on the right, it's very low, thank you. I take advantage of that almost daily nowadays because Medicare covers me. A few percent of the country didn't have that Medicare. But in between, as soon as 18 occurred, you see the red vertical line? It went all the way up to 35% of the United States were uninsured. Those who were insured after 18 had jobs. Their their employer helped them with the insurance, or they were in a state that happened to have Medicaid-type care before the Affordable Care Act. What happened in the next 5 years, because of the Affordable Care Act, cut in half the insurance rate in AYAs. Dramatic improvement. Thank you for the Affordable Care Act. So what happened then to children who became 18, 19, 20, 25 and were benefiting it from that perspective? Well, in terms of cancer at that age level, what you see on the left is age 6 to 8 and 9 to 11, and in the middle is the the Affordable Care Act range from 18 to 25, and then the older age groups all the way up to, I guess in this slide, up to 49. I'm not showing you what happened to the survival rate in the Affordable Care Act group in the middle yet. But what you see is improvement in the 5-year survival rate of those in those age groups, younger than or older than the Affordable Care Act 18 to 25 year age range. In fact, over there at far left, a 0.8% improvement in the survival rate every year between ages 6 and 9, I guess. And on the far right, you see it going up 0.8. What happened to the AYAs, 18 to 25 years of age, after the Affordable Care Act was passed in the first 5 years of the Affordable Care Act? We just updated that data. Thank you, Affordable Care Act, and those who promoted and passed it. I can also show you that the mortality rate, which is a different graph, has gone down at age range statistically significantly compared to younger and older people. So not only are they living longer, they're dying less. And we are submitting that for publication as a follow-up. So, and I'll just finish with this point. We need to make sure not only is the Affordable Care Act continued, but we need to raise the age, not just to 25, but to 30, 35, 40, or ultimately have a national health plan for everybody who's uninsured between the ages of 18 and 65, the Medicare age. Protect, expand, as I see you nodding, the Affordable Care Act, which may be in jeopardy if we don't think about it.
And Stephanie, you were one of those direct beneficiaries of that expansion, the dependent care expansion.
So currently me and my husband are both under the Affordable Care Act because it's a lot cheaper. It's less than half of what we would be paying through my employer. So we currently have healthcare marketplace insurance, but back when I was going through the cancer treatments, so my mother worked for a university hospital, and so I was still being covered under her health insurance up until the age of 25. And I got diagnosed right at 25 with my breast cancer. So all of my treatments, everything was covered under her insurance through University Hospital. And that wouldn't have been possible. And even more so, the matter of the fact is that whenever I was about to age out, I was looking at potentially getting radiation treatment, and I ended up choosing not to do radiation treatment, in part, not completely, but in part because I knew my insurance would drop about a third of the way through it. So most of it, I wouldn't have had insurance to cover the radiation treatments.
It's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. And to your point, Dr. Blyer, we have more AYAs surviving longer. Like, I've been alive almost twice as long as I was alive before cancer. And so survivorship is a huge issue for AYAs as well as we're living longer. And wouldn't say we're exactly the same. Like, we get our own little quirks and stuff that kind of follow us after treatment. And I've continued to deal with chronic illness. It's been almost impossible to find providers that know how to treat me. And I am fortunate because I worked in and around AYAs and in oncology. And one of my oncology friends in town was like, you really need to go to this survivorship clinic, the AYA survivorship clinic that we have in town. And I was like, what AYA survivorship clinic? Did you guys know that there was an AYA survivor clinic? Yep, UT here in San Antonio. And I went to UT. I was referred to a cancer rehab specialist who was able to actually get me a diagnosis. And it was through digging through literature to see like, oh, these long-term AYA or leukemia survivors are popping up with this issue. Let's test you for that. And sure enough, that's what it was. But this is a discussion we had last night. One, you guys were not referred to any sort of survivorship clinic. Didn't know it existed until when?
Literally last night.
Literally last night. Literally, I emailed it to them last night, the links to like go get seen. And do any of you guys have chronic side effects that probably need to be managed?
Yes.
Yes.
And I don't know where to start.
Yes. So this survivorship piece, I felt like I finished treatment and then was kind of dumped. Like it was like a breakup. And I was like, you loved me and cared for me so much. And then all of a sudden you're not interested in me, even though I'm still having issues. And really, would you please help? And no, this is just my new normal. I just need to figure out how to live after you poisoned me for 2.5 years. Oh, I have to go and figure this out myself. Okay. This
Cool.
cool. Not cool. So those of you working in these spaces, really push your institutions. What are you guys doing to support AYA's survivorship? This is a lifelong thing. Like I have to have scans every year and then some scans every 5 years. And these are things that I didn't even know until I started working with educated AYA oncologists in my professional work. So I just wanted to highlight that. But one of the reasons I have lived so long is in large part because of you, Dr. Blair. Because
Let me add something, because I just realized sitting here that survivorship for children with cancer has been going on for 20, 30, even 35 years. We've got centers all over the country who have children coming back until they're so old they can't come back anymore, to be sure they're okay and to learn what we did wrong or did right over their rest of their life. We don't have that as we should for AYAs. And yet, again, there's another discrepancy. So the gap is not just what I showed you on the screen earlier. It's the AYA survivorship programs need to be developed to the point that they match what's happening in younger people. So yeah, we need to address that too. I just discovered that now in 2014, huh? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that point. Well, I was just going to say your early research really focused on pediatric and advancing, survival rates for pediatric leukemia, and I was a beneficiary of that. I had a pediatric form of leukemia, and now you're trying to do the same thing for AYAs, because when I was diagnosed, I always had a really high survival rate, but teens that were just a little bit older than me in 2000, when I was diagnosed, did not have the same positive prognosis. But I hear you have a groundbreaking update for us on progress that's been made on AYA leukemia.
Thank
More
you.
slides.
If you want
Hold
to
on.
set that up. Which, by the way, I think Ryan and Stephanie and Eddie would have all said they don't even know who to see sometimes. They've got their internist, family practitioner, emergency room at the clinic somewhere, gynecologist, psychologist, and who's going to coordinate that for them individually? I mean, and are they going to pay for every one of those visits when it should be organized and coordinated like a symphony director or something? That's the other discrepancy. Okay. Okay, so this is a little hard to follow, but there was a survival cliff in young adults, older adolescents who had the most common diagnosis in children with cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And two of you, Ryan and Stanzi, have had ALL. And notice I said was a survival cliff, and they had ALL. Why can I put that in the past tense? Because of clinical trials. The survival cliff looks something like this. Going back to 2002 to 2003, so 12, 13, 14 years ago. When our patients in the United States turn 16 and 17 years of age, their prognosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and there's also something called lymphoblastic lymphoma, suddenly dropped. It went from, back then, 75% down 30% just because they turned another year or two older. And it stayed down there at that 40% level until age 40, and then it stopped dropping again. So that drop that you see at the age of 17 was called the survival cliff. If you were diagnosed at the age of 18 or 17, you had half the likelihood of surviving than if you were diagnosed at 15. Why? Because, and I'm not going to show this, we were not studying with clinical trials above the age of 15 or 16 in the United States the problem. And since everything, and this is a little bit of an exaggeration, everything we've learned about treating cancer in persons came from clinical trials. Without doing clinical trials, testing new therapy, there's a very elaborate schema for doing it called phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there's randomized phase 3, randomized placebo-controlled, randomized trials. Without that kind of investigation, we didn't learn much at all. And the more we learned from it, the more we realized clinical trials make all the difference. They wouldn't be here without clinical trials. Interesting, I was on a clinical trial with my prostate cancer. Maybe I wouldn't be here either. It's a little different clinical trial, but nonetheless, that's so important so that when we started to raise, after 2003, the number of clinical trials and the participation of AYAs on clinical trials, so we had new clinical trials just for them, and they were starting to be recruited and participating, enrolled in clinical trials. We went from what happened in red here, 100 deaths per year attributed to the lack of extending the survival trend above the age of 15, and that amounted to over 5,000 life years lost just from going from the age of 15 to 17 in the United States. What's happened since we raised the clinical trial rate and accruals, so we put more and more young adults and older adolescents on clinical trials, in the last few years we got rid of the survival cliff. Somewhere in Texas today, somewhere in Texas on this day, there's going to be a 16 or 17-year-old diagnosed with that cancer. And because of clinical trials, they have so much a better chance. And I'll show you the total benefit of that. Well, I guess I can. Anyway, yeah, you can barely see that green zone, I think. I can't from here on the angle. But the green shaded area, we have been preventing 180 deaths every year just because of that survival cliff. And that's a total of more than 8,000 years of life saved, because a 16 or 17-year-old should now live to 60, 70 or more years of age. And you add all that up, you're saving more, we are saving more than 8,000 years of life saved just because of the clinical trial improvement. No AYA should go with cancer to a doctor who's the specialist, let's say an oncologist or a radiation oncologist or a surgical oncologist, gynecologist, and not ask about clinical trials that may be helpful to them. Because, can I go ahead and finish on this?
Yeah.
Because they personally benefit from that, because they may have advances, because that's what clinical trials offer, to the newest treatment, which they wouldn't otherwise be able to access, because you can't use these new treatments without clinical trials. All of a sudden, instead of a few docs, a few nurses, they have a huge team behind the clinical trials, not only in their community and state, but nationally and internationally. We have experts all over the world working on these clinical trials together, not just ourselves in this country, but with Canada and Europe and Asia. They also have potentially better chances of surviving because they're on a clinical trial, even if they get placebo, because they get more care and have a bigger team and more experts and follow up. The placebo control persons usually do better than those who aren't on the clinical trials. They have fewer adverse effects because we definitely need to improve the toxicity, whether it's financial, physiological, psychological, social, and so forth. And then, interestingly, because clinical trials are required by the sponsor, the cooperative group, the National Cancer Institute, the pharmaceutical industry, the device industry, to pay for participating in a clinical trial, it's less expensive to be on a clinical trial. Yeah, you may have to drive to Houston or to Palo Alto, but even in some places the costs are covered, the travel costs. It's amazing what the financial benefit is of clinical trials. So finally, and maybe most importantly, and this is what I've learned from patients as recently as 2 days ago who died of pancreatic carcinoma, the altruism of being on a clinical trial so that you contribute to the knowledge and help others who follow you, who are going to benefit because you, even if it's just a single person, have helped understand the problem, improve the treatment, reduce the toxicity, and even reduce the cost, although that's still a huge problem because, and I'll finish with this, there is no specialty in medicine that's more expensive in terms of the medication, the pills that cost $1,000 each nowadays, a good friend of mine, than cancer or oncology. So we've got a long way to go on that too. Okay, so please promote clinical trials. They weren't on clinical trials except the person right next to me here.
Treated at a pediatric research institution.
Yeah. Stanford, I think, if I got that right. Stanford.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Blyer. So as you can see, yes, thank you. As you can see, there's still a lot of work to be done to support our AYAs. And in the meantime, organizations like the AYA Foundation are standing in the gap for these AYAs. And Ryan and Stephanie, if you could just say a sentence or two about what a grant from the AYA Foundation meant to you.
Well, just to reiterate, like it literally meant eating or not eating for me for a good amount of time over the past 2 years.
For me, it meant, well, me and my husband, it meant, potential future of having kids and also keeping a roof over our head when we were living in an apartment and keeping car notes paid. I was a primary breadwinner and I couldn't work because of chemo. So it kept us afloat for a couple months, well, several months.
Yeah. Thank you. And Dr. Blyer, you're a huge, very open supporter of the AYA Foundation. What is it that makes the AYA Foundation unique and special?
It's hard to find any other foundation like this anywhere in the United States. And we've been trying. Yeah, we found maybe one or two that are similar, one in the New England area, but none of them help right up front with the financial day-to-day costs, whether it's food or travel or fertility preservation. Yes, there are a couple or maybe a few that just do that, but not both and not in general. That's why there are many sites in the country who are learning about AYA-FSA, San Antonio, because you do something different. And they wanted their AYAs and families and even care providers want to help their AYAs the way you do, because nobody else is doing it. So we need to expand, and we've worked hard on trying to do this with great difficulty. What's done here uniquely, or if not almost uniquely, essentially, to help AYAs across the United States. That's why donations are relevant.
I love that plug, Dr. Blyer. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for traveling all the way across the United States to come and talk to us. Do you have any final...
From Oregon?
Yeah, just getting out of Texas takes a lot. So, do you have any final words for us as we wrap up?
Yes, you've heard of the difficulty having cancer. and continuing to have to deal with almost on a daily, if not daily basis. But I also want to point out the benefit of having had cancer, because I've seen this over and over again, and I've seen it in all of you who have had cancer before. And I notice it in myself a little too. The benefit of going through the ordeal, the toxicity, the trauma, is amazingly beneficial in terms of wisdom, of understanding the problem. I don't think you'd have Constanza, Stephanie, or Ryan sitting on the stage and trying to be helpful to all of you because of the benefit of having had cancer, of being more aware, intelligent, wise, experienced, gratuitous, altruistic. I don't think she would have had 7 adopted children if she didn't have cancer. So the benefit's important too. Realize that, and sometimes remember it so that when it's the next big problem, whether you can't swallow after your bone marrow transplant, or you wonder what about your stored ova and so forth, think about the wisdom that you have from it, because I've seen that here on the stage and on a daily basis with AYA cancers. There's another quick point to make. If there are 90,000+, and it's going up, new cases of cancer between 15 and 39 years of age every year in the United States, add it up, and you've got millions of AYAs with cancer, and the majority are surviving, so there are millions of survivors. There's a team that you need to coordinate at your level using AYA leadership. And that team could be an army to make a difference. And that team could go out with every one of them and ask for support. So I think there's a benefit of being an AYA cancer survivor.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Blyer. This has been a wonderful and such an important discussion. And Stephanie, Ryan, and Eddie, who couldn't be here, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for your bravery, for your vulnerability with us. And Dr. Blyer, it's been such an honor to share the stage with you, and so many in the AYA community owe our lives to the work that you've done. You've given your life to save ours, and we really want to honor that. So let's give them an applause. And we have a card for you with our appreciation. Thank you so much. Let's give our whole panel an applause. Thank you.